Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mental Golf Show, where we discuss all things golf psychology to help avid golfers improve their game. I'm Josh Nichols, and on today's episode, we have a special guest. His name is Gary Waters. He is a mindset coach and a deep thinker, as you will hear from this episode. We go really, really deep, and he works with golfers, but he also works across the spectrum of entrepreneurs and different athletes and different industries. So this is more of and we certainly talk about golf, and Gary is a golfer himself. So you can use all this depth of information and apply it to golf. And yes, we use specific golf examples throughout, but a lot of it is more about you as a person. And ultimately, that's what the Mental Golf Show is. It's about you as a person. It's about your psychology. It's about your identity, how you view yourself, and what that does to your golf game. Your golf game is a symptom of all of these things. So I think you'll gather that theme from this episode. It's a heavy, deep episode, but I think it was really, really entertaining to talk to Gary about all these things. I love these things, so I eat it up with a spoon. So I really hope that you enjoy it. So without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Gary Waters. Gary, thank you for being here, and this is a pleasure. Like we said before we started recording, this has been months in the making. We've been batting emails back and forth, trying to get in touch, but we're finally doing it.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for this conversation. Like you said, this has been in the making for a while, so I'm excited to see where the conversation flows.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. So I really do appreciate it. It's an honor anytime someone stoops to my level to being to be on the podcast. So it's very cool. Very cool. Okay. So I had a few intro questions for you. I guess first off, who are you and what do you do? How do you kind of describe your industry or what you do specifically? How do you talk about that?
Yeah, it's always that fascinating question, and it's quite challenging to describe what I do, to be honest. So anyone listening to this, they're probably like, "Oh, okay." But my work, it focuses on the subconscious mind. And I'm blessed to work with performers in all kinds of industries. I love golf, so it's always a bit of a passion project for me when I get to work with these amazing golfers. But I work with everybody from elite athletes to entrepreneurs to stay-at-home moms with kids. It's just everybody, because the reason why is that I'm always looking at the person behind whatever we do. So I kind of traffic in that subconscious mind, meaning I'm listening out for the language that is showing people what they don't know. So I never tell people this around the dinner table because they're like, "Hey, are you listening to my deepest subconscious blocks here?" I'm like, "No, no, I'm
Right.
just having dinner." But it is an occupational biohazard sometimes. So yeah, by understanding these subconscious limitations, we could say that we're completely oblivious to, those are our blocks. It creates a ceiling to what we can do and what we can experience on our inner world. So my joy is showing people those, showing them that they're fundamentally not true, which leads to a life of peace, joy, ease, power, freedom. If you're into that, that's kind of what I get up to.
Okay, yeah, that is it's got a lot of depth to it. And like you said, and actually it's funny you said at the dinner table, I wrote to ask you, okay, how would you introduce yourself at, say, a party or something? Like what would be your kind of when someone asks me, I say I'm a golf psychology coach, or someone else might say I'm a plumber. I'm a this, I'm a that. So what would be your 2 3 word term you would call yourself?
Yeah, the one that I keep landing on for right now, which is just a mindset coach. And for me, that always gets it inspires a question back because it's not the normal answer. And they're like, "Oh, what'd you do?" Right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
And then you
that's the
go
one.
into the the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I just outright lie because otherwise it becomes they're like, "Hey, you listening to me?"
Right. Yeah. 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 It can get too deep. You don't always want to explain every little detail about what you do. So I totally understand that. So in our emails back and forth, you said you or I read somewhere that you have a golf background and like a personal golf background. So maybe talk about that. Talk about your own golf game. Where are you at? How much are you getting to play? That those kind of things.
Yeah, so I've recently made a return. So I had about 12,
Ah,
yeah, I had 12 years off. And so it's just this year I've made my return and I'm loving it. My history in golf, it actually goes way back because my dad was a teaching pro for 30 years. So I
no
was
kidding.
always brought up around golf, but my dad is such a sweetheart. He never wanted to pressure me into it. So I picked it up really late. I got into golf when I was about 12, 13. And then, as most people do, they fall in love with it. And I then went on the journey to see if I could become a pro myself. But the irony is, the place I always fell down was on the mental side of the game. So
Interesting.
I have jokes with my dad, and he's just like, damn, if you had your mindset now that you did when you were a kid, like you would have been a bit of a force. So it's just funny how things go. But yes, I then went more into training bodies, as in became a PT, and then totally switched track and become a hotelier for about 11 years. And that was actually the industry that broke me completely, that got me into this work. So that's a very quick summary of my life.
No kidding. That's got some ups and downs, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but as I look back on that journey, I don't regret any of it. But it's
Hmm.
it's fascinating now to be able to have that kind of golfing background, to be able to speak to these amazing athletes, and then to be able to actually know what they're going through to a certain degree.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
You've got some personal experience to attach to it.
yeah, I've kind of brought up around pro golfers, so it's always an interesting conversation to be a part of that.
So you said you struggled with the mental part. That's kind of what held you back. What were some specifics there? What was going on with your mindset, your mental game when you were younger?
Yeah, so when I was playing, it was, I think, as a result of my dad being a golf pro, I was always looking to be perfect at golf. I felt the expectation of other people, what might people think, probably trying to be a bit of a good boy. My
Mhm.
dad never put, pressure on me, but it was self-imposed pressure. So this kind of goes way back and what actually led to my complete burnout breakdown late 20s, early 30s. I'm now 40. And it's what I didn't realize what got set up as a kid was this fundamental belief that I wasn't good enough. And that wasn't due to golf, it was actually due to school and being bullied due to my weight. So when I'm speaking with people, this is one of those deeper subconscious codes or bits of programming that I like to point out to people, because on the surface I was just trying to be perfect, right?
Mhm.
That is the behavioral adaptation to inadequacy, not feeling enough. And it didn't just show up in my golf game, it was everywhere, right? It was, train 3 hours in the gym, look good, right? It was got to get all of the money, got to get the house, got to get the beautiful partner on my side, have the kids. And it was just trying to buy into that model of society that says when I get, then I'll be happy. So, as a kid playing golf, that was just a micro of a much deeper macro code that was running me.
Right. The term that comes to mind is actually one that I found on on your site was about subconscious programming and I this sounds like it's in the same vein and you correct me if this oh no that's something totally different but there was an interesting quote on your site that I thought um, could use an injection right here. The quote is your subconscious programming gives rise to your perspective, thoughts, and feelings, which then determine your actions and results in your experience. So, am I, is it fair to say that these things are related in some way?
Absolutely. Yeah. You're a smart study and amazing you did your homework. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, perfectly said. And that's my perspective and that's how I work. So it's a bit of this like reverse engineering process. So, when most people are looking at the results that they get, normally they're results, let's say, that they don't want if they're looking to really improve on them, right? So what most people do, they'll go to a coach to help them improve their behavior or the actions that they're taking. It's logical, makes total
Mm.
sense, right? So this is where they go to their golf coach and the pro, and they're like, help me with my swing, right? And of course, mechanics is such a big part of golf, but the area obviously that I traffic is in the mind. So for me, the behavior is a little bit kind of too far down the line
Mm.
because the behavior is being inspired by the thoughts and feelings that preceded it, and those arise out of our perspective of life. Now, the challenge is most people don't know how, like, their perspective, because it's become so normal to them, right? So it's a bit like wearing blue sunglasses, from birth. If I asked you, what color's the world, what would you say?
Just is what it is. I wouldn't know any different. You would say it's blue, probably.
Well, no, you answered it beautifully. Like most people don't. They say
They don't
blue.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you actually are so smart, you got it, which is awesome, right? So this is
Yeah.
like, because if you're looking through the lens all your life, you don't know that you're looking through it. So
Mm.
this is the lens that people don't know that I'm pointing out, and when you see it, it's like, oh, holy because as soon as you shift perspective, then your thoughts change, your feelings change because you think and feel differently. You take new actions, and guess what? You get new results. So
Mm.
that kind of explains that little cascade. So just changing behavior it can have some impact, but not long term, right? Because if you're still stood up on the first, whether you're playing like as an amateur, like your yearly medal or whatever, or you're standing on the first of the British Open, if you've got fear there going on, well, that's mental. That's coming out of a fear-based perspective. But nobody knows what they're truly fearful of. So to have that explained, they're like, oh wow, well now I can question that and then I can let it go. And that becomes so powerful.
Right. So the tendency or the default state that most people jump to is every time I'm trying to close out a round, I start getting the hooks, and so I need to fix the hooks. I need to do something in my swing to fix it. I need to change my swing plane to where it's an anti-left move for a right-hander like myself. Because, and I'm saying these things from personal experience. This is something that I used to struggle with. I guess I still do, but addressing the swing is addressing the behavior or the action or the end of that pipeline. And a word I often use is a symptom, right? It's the symptom of the issue. So what can what can the regular player do that isn't working with you, isn't working with me, isn't working with somebody, only works with an instructor maybe, and maybe not even that? What can they do to realize, okay, that's just the symptom. I need to dig down to the deeper cause.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it shows your level of awareness, right? So yeah, it's first realizing, as you beautifully said, it's the symptom, right? It's not to say don't go to your local pro. Definitely go to
Yeah.
the pro, right? They can help. They can definitely help, right?
Yes.
But if you've been practicing, for 3 or 4 weeks and you close out rounds beautifully, then hey, maybe there's something going on between the mind, like in here, right? So it's really just first and foremost paying attention, which is having the awareness to observe the conversation that's arising on the surface of your mind, right? And that is the entry point because most people are so locked in because they're generally already in fight or flight, right? Which creates a very narrow focus because we're on the golf course, but what's going on is there's a danger here, right? Otherwise, we're not in fight, flight, or freeze. So, first and foremost, just pay attention to what's going through your mind at that time, because that will be the clue, right? And then you can start this process of like reverse engineering to kind of ask yourself a question like, who would I have to believe myself to be in order to be feeling fear right now? What would I have to believe to be true about me to be feeling this?
Mm,
Right. And that's a really great question just to get you started, just to get you curious. So obviously it can be quite hard to do just for ourselves. But, a lot of what I learned, especially around mindset, I learned for free. The internet's a great place.
mm,
My life did go to a different level when I invested a tremendous amount of money in mentors. But, it's not to say that you have to go that route. So yeah, it's to first and foremost just be aware. That's a great place to start. But then to also realize that the reason why you'd either slice it or you'd hook it where normally you wouldn't is because you're in some form of fear. There's a tension that's arisen in your body as a result of it, and therefore your timing's gone out, and therefore it's hard to swing and flow. So for that reason, you hang on to it for a little bit too long and you get the result that you don't want. So for me, it's getting actually to that natural state of peace, to that natural state of joy, but more out of fear, right? So that would be where I'd start.
okay. And that's a level or three or four deeper than most golfers will go. And whether it's by choice of I know that's what I should be asking myself, but I'm choosing not to because that's too hard or that's too deep, or the lack of awareness to even go there. We stay on that surface level of, and we see it all the time. A golfer will hit a bad shot, and what's the first thing they do is they rehearse the motion of, okay, how could I fix this? How could I make it different? What am I going to do the next time with swing wise? But
Yeah.
what they don't realize is the next time they're in that situation, the same thing's going to happen, most likely. And they might get a little bit lucky and happen to hit a good one, but most likely the same thing is going to happen despite the physical efforts that you're making.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of the greatest things I think any performer, and to be honest, anyone in life can come to realize is this relationship or the mechanism, let's say, of the mind, which is it uses past hurt to inform future fear, right? So whatever you've experienced, even on a personal level, because we didn't want that and that really hurt, or on the golf course where we've, shanked a few or duffed a few. I definitely experienced that the other day. Um, but because that's happened, or you played a certain hole, and you just whatever you do, you just keep doubling it, right? You just keep getting double bogeys. You're standing up there for like this moment has never ever happened before, but you kind of say to your friends, "Hey, watch me like knock this out of bounds," or something like that, right? So it's to understand that words create worlds, as in it's programming. So we create our reality in that moment, but to really recognize that without a history, there's no concern of a future moment. So, which leaves you in peace in the present. So, we know where to look, right? So, by teaching people how to let go of history, whether it's on a personal level or in golf, that's the way that people then get to step up to the tee or for a putt for the first time, where there's just complete peace to be able to knock it in or to hit the green or to smooth it down the fairway. Right. So to understand just that mechanism and how the mind functions in time is a complete game changer.
Mm, that's uh, that's super interesting, and the timing that you're saying this is really crazy for me personally. And I don't know if you've read this book. I happen to have it right next to me on the desk. I've got The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and
Yeah.
and it's amazing. I'm only 30 some pages in, but what you're describing right there is how the mind. Um, I love what you said. It uses past hurt to inform future fear. So so the mind hangs on to the past as a survival mechanism, right? If we can use info from the past, we can try to predict and survive the uncertain future. So in golf, that's remembering all the past bad shots that felt terrible, and let's hang on to that information to protect us from future bad shots, future bad feelings. Is that about accurate?
It's perfect. And I love that you're reading that book. That was one of the first that I read when I got into this industry, which I kind of fell into through desperation. But, that book is one actually that I give to every single one of my clients. It's one of the first reads. It's incredibly powerful. It speaks into that mechanism of time, but also the survival nature of the mind. But it will really help anyone. So I'm excited to, I'll check in with you, just see what you thought of it once you finish it, but it's awesome. And so, yeah, you nailed it. This body, this equipment, as I like to call it, it's designed for survival, so it's hardwired on the deepest level. So our personality, our identity, we normally kind of collapse also with what I've just called the equipment, but I layer it out to show people different levels to their identity. But what we can see is that the identity, when it becomes threatened, triggers our equipment, the body, in the same way it would if we had like a tiger on the golf course, not Tiger Woods, but like,
That
literally
too,
like,
right?
yeah, that'd be pretty, just like, I'm not playing with Tiger, I would play with Tiger. I'm like, just help me play golf, please.
Right.
But yeah, it's amazing what happens because when we trigger a fear, of let's say missing a putt or something that we've done last week, and we're fearing we're going to do it again, and what will our friends think, or what will be the chat in the clubhouse at the end, whatever, right? It's just like we are using that fear to try and avoid it happening again. But in our body, it's like we are being faced by the bear. And for that reason, that's why we get tense. And that's why we actually then get the result that we don't want. So, yeah, to be able to learn how to let go of history is incredibly powerful.
I want to take a moment to talk about the sponsor of this episode, the Custom Weekly Practice Plan. The Custom Weekly Practice Plan is my own product, not someone else's. But I want to tell you why I think it's a valuable way to invest in your own golf game. When I was a junior golfer and then a Division 1 college golfer and then living with my parents trying to get good enough to turn pro, I practiced a ton. I would spend hours and hours a day at the range or in my makeshift indoor hitting area trying to work on my game in what I thought was the most effective way. But turns out, I think I was doing more harm than good to my golf game. My priority was on quantity, thinking that if I could just hit enough balls, I would magically ingrain the technique that I wanted into my body. Now, from the outside, this seems logical, and that's because it is partly true, but it's all I was doing, which I have since learned is not the most effective way to practice. What I learned from both my instructor, Robert Linville at Precision Golf School, as well as the keys to deliberate practice laid out by Anders Ericsson in his book Peak, was that practice needed to be much more than just repetition. Practice needs to be much more variable than that. So, here are some of the keys to effective deliberate practice. Your practice needs to be outside your comfort zone, which means trying things that are beyond your current ability. You need to have well defined specific goals. You need to be improving some specific aspect of what you will actually do while you perform on the course, not just aimed at vague overall improvement. You need feedback and to modify your efforts based on that feedback. And your practice needs to be designed and overseen by a coach. Now, before working with my coach, Robert, I was basically getting none of these right. But he and I together laid out a plan for me to actually improve in a systematic, measured way. And that meant that it was much more randomized and challenging than what I was previously doing. So, this is where the custom weekly practice plan comes in. This practice plan is based directly on the keys to deliberate practice, as well as what I was personally doing to improve my game, to ultimately getting to where I was winning multiple state level events, as well as making it to the finals of the US Mid Amateur. So when you purchase the custom weekly practice plan, you will fill out a form where you will give me your stats if you take them. You don't need to have taken them. Or you will give me your general assessment of your own game. You'll give me your golf time availability in an ideal week, and then you'll also tell me the resources that you have access to for practice. And with that information, I will personally hand build you a week of practice laid out for you to know exactly what you will be doing at a specific time on a specific day of the week. Now, planning your practice allows you to be unemotional about your practice time. So you're actually working on things that you need to improve, not just things you're already good at and that are more fun to practice. Now, this is a more difficult and uncomfortable way to practice, but if you're interested in getting better, then you need to practice more effectively. So you can go check out the custom weekly practice plan by going to joshnicholsgolf.com/practice. Okay, so that's what I was going to ask you next. Letting go of history, and this is related to that past hurt and the using those past experiences, clinging onto them to protect from the future fear, the future uncertainty. How what does letting go of history, like, how does that mechanically play out? How does that what can someone practically do to let go of history? And like in this book, he um he talks a lot about being present, and that's what we're getting at here is, not past, not future, but being present. But how how does one just simply let go of all the past bad shots that have happened? Every time I'm in this situation, this happens. How can I let go of that history?
A great question. And the answer that could be very quick, but I'll go into it in a bit more detail, would be to say, what's your history got to do with right now? Right? When someone really gets that, it's just like, it's history, it's happened. One of my mentors, a guy called Peter Crone, I'm blessed to work as a coach and a mentor in his mastermind program. And he's got this beautiful quote. He speaks generally in quotes whenever he's talking to people on podcasts. And he says, what happened happened and couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't.
Mm,
Right? Super powerful, just from a logical kind of way of looking at history, is that it happened.
mm,
It couldn't have been different because it happened. Right?
yeah.
And if what we could say is if we can accept that equals acceptance, you're free. Right? But oftentimes, to actually let go of that history, we want to understand it, which means we want to bring in a high level of awareness as to, okay, why was that perceived as something that was so negative or so bad? Right? So at the moment, what everybody does, not everyone, apart from people that do this work, right, is we drag our history into the present moment. So in fact, we hold on to our history. We hold on to it because it was painful. We haven't processed it. We're resisting what happened. So the key words for anyone would be you're resisting what happened, which keeps you holding on to it. So the moment we can understand it and accept it, that's the precursor to being able to let it go, but more than anything, integrate it, right?
Mm,
So like I like integration because it's a bit like all of those shots that we missed or we messed up, you know, we can think of them as like little cuts on our body, like wounds, right? But they're open still, so they hurt. So the process is actually that healing process of the wound. Because if I said to you, Josh, think of a scar on your body, like do you have a scar anywhere?
mm,
You do, right?
hmm.
Before I said anything, were you thinking of a scar?
No,
No, right? Because it's integrated. You're not thinking of
it's
it
just part of
anymore.
me.
Yeah. So that's what we do with history is, the healing of those wounds is the integration of them to realize actually they're just what happened. And instead of something that was bad, how can I learn? How can I grow from that? Yeah, rather than what most people do. I failed. I'm like, I'm not enough,
Mm.
you know, and it's got all of this implication on a much deeper level, let's say the inadequacy, because that is one of the deeper subconscious codes, but it's the consequence of not being enough that we really fear.
So
And for
the
me,
right. I'm sorry to interrupt. So what brings to mind, and what I'd like, I guess you maybe to clarify, or you've probably clarified this already, but the accumulation of those open wounds that have never healed, does that lead to the, I guess, poor or low self identity?
it does. Perfect word, accumulation, right? It's that build up, and it kind of acts like an energetic backpack that we carry, and that's why we struggle through life, right? So yes, it's the accumulation of all of these hurts that then become like a heavy energetic weight that we then drag into the present, and also then in our minds project into a bad future that hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
You know?
That's that is I mean, that perfectly describes what I have experienced for myself, where I will I've got plenty of bad past experiences, or what I, to in theme of this episode, what I perceive as bad, right? I've labeled them as bad because okay, I snap hooked that tee shot on hole 14 at that golf course, and I made a double and I lost the tournament by one. So because that was such a strong emotional impact on me, it it made a wound. It was a large wound for me at the time, and because I've never processed it or integrated it into myself, it's still open to an extent. I still perceive that event as bad. So for me in that situation, what could I do to process that? What could I do to turn that open wound into a scar?
Yeah, so the first thing that we could look at really logically is what happened couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't, right? So it's really recognizing as it relates to history, it's done,
Mm,
it's finished, it's gone, right? But the degree to which you carry it into the present will be what defines your results moving forward, right? So just in that knowingness, but to really acknowledge, you said a great word. It's my perception of it being bad. But what we could question is it really bad? Because if you look at it, if we look just got objective with it, what happened was there was a human called Josh, snap hooked or hit it, I'm guessing left, did you say?
mm, mm.
Snap hooked it left, the ball traveled somewhere, it landed, you played out that hole, and the tournament was lost by one shot. Now
Right.
that's actually what happened. The rest is story.
Mm. The rest is what
Right?
I'm putting onto it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
So the event is just an event, but how you perceive it will determine its meaning, right? It will determine what you believe about you. For the person that won by one shot, that was a great event.
Yeah. My snap
But
hook was a good thing to them.
yeah, yeah. So when we can just get objective about it and go, like the content of life is the content of life. It's kind of neutral, but depending on the context, the way we view it will give its meaning. It's like, two prisoners stood behind prison bars. One saw mud, the other saw stars. It's the same event, right? So it's to be able to see that that just happened, but then we can get to learn and grow from it. There's also the exploration for like Josh as to what did he make that mean about him, right? And
Yeah.
that's where, for me, when I used to do things like that, it would be like, see, I'm not enough. So it strengthens this identity that I built over time. So I'm such a loser. And like as I said before, that's not the worst outcome because the inadequacy then feeds into, okay, so then what? Well, if I'm not good enough, well, then I'm not going to be loved. And then it's like, oh, well, if I'm not loved, then I might not belong. I might not be accepted. I might not be wanted. And then So it keeps going. And then, okay, what if that's true? Well, then I'll be kicked out. I'll be left isolated. And now we get into that survival realm. And that's why people go into fight or flight on the golf course, because it's a death threat. Because if I'm alone and with the bear, eh, right, if it's a big bear,
Hmm.
that's a death threat, do you see? So we start to make things mean things about us that just aren't, they're just not true, right? So what I'm about is showing people truth and that there's nothing wrong with them fundamentally, which is hard. Some people really fight me on it, but I've never lost that conversation, right?
Right.
So yeah, does that help answer that little question?
Yeah,
Or
it does. So I have, if I'm still holding on to that, I'm still holding on to that history and that past hurt. I'm, I have, I mean, it's grown, right? At the time, it was just one singular little event that lasted across the span of about an hour and 15 minutes, but it has it has festered and grown into this kind of how I see myself. It has turned into an identity of when I'm under pressure, I do this. This happens to me. And no matter how much evidence I show myself that it doesn't happen, it still lingers there. So evidence and good things and good results piled on top of it mask it just a little bit, but they don't make it go away. It's still there at the very bottom. So I think most people would say, I just need to get some more good results. I need to just hit some more good shots. I need to be under pressure, hit some good shots, then I'll feel confident. So why is that? I'm assuming that mentality isn't great. Why would you say that's not a great way to go about it?
yeah, it's like it's generally how a lot of kind of positive psychology and the way it used to be kind of viewed. And I never will ever make anyone wrong. I'm just really impressed by what works. Right. So for me, that's not getting to the root cause because, we want to get to what's really driving the behavior that is leading to the results that you don't want. Like, why are you feeling pressure? Because for other people, they wouldn't be feeling pressure in that moment, right? So
Mm,
that's where the gold is. Wherever we get triggered or our stress response gets fired is like my gold dust. That's one of the first things I ask my clients when I'm sat in front, like, where do you get upset about life? Where can't you be okay with what is? Right. And for me, that's the reverse engineering process where it really begins. So that's where I would start, would be in and around the pressure. Like, why is there pressure? And then we would probably go into your history and discover like a moment that happened that you've forgotten where you decided something, especially about yourself. Maybe you had it like something was said to you, you know, it will be in there. And when you discover the genesis of the pattern, then there's no more pressure. So then performance just happens.
mm,
And if you can get a relationship to your results that you can be okay whether it works out or it doesn't work out, you just stay completely committed to excellence, but you're not attached to the outcome for it to mean something about you or to elicit some feeling that you think it's going to give you, right? So for some people, they might want the tournament win, then I'll be happy, or then I'll be good enough. It's like, no, because you're still looking externally to feel something within. But from my view, our inner world leads our outer world based on the context, imposing the view onto the content of what I just shared. That was quite deep. So hopefully
yeah,
people
it
are
was.
tracking.
That was
So
awesome.
yeah, so it's to really realize if we're just looking for like forcing our way through a fear, you still got the fear, right? It's you're not going anywhere. You're trying to overcome something. It's a bit like affirmations, right? Again, not putting anyone down, but you're still in front of the mirror going, I'm an amazing golfer. I'm powerful. I'm a fucking magician. So I
Mhm.
don't know if I could swear there. You could bleep it out. I get passionate talking about this,
Yeah, man.
but it's just they're like shouting in the mirror, like, I'm amazing. What are you subtly reinforcing? Is that you're not because you only have to you're standing in the mirror for a reason because you don't think you're amazing, you don't think that you're awesome, you don't think that you're powerful, right? So it's kind of like a little, probably a bad expression here, but in England might say it's makeup on a pig, right? It doesn't do
Hmm.
anything, right? So
Sure.
for for me, like it's not putting it down, and it's definitely better than berating ourselves in the mirror. That's not good.
Mm.
But subtly, the affirmations are actually reinforcing the identity that is the genesis of the performance. So we want to get into who are you for yourself, that it has like this moment stood on the final tee or wherever where you're feeling pressure. Why is that? What's the outcome here? Like, what is it going to mean for you? What is it that you're trying to avoid happening? What can't you be okay with? So those are like beautiful questions that start like an exploration,
Right.
because you get there and it's just like you're just at peace. You're just like, okay, like I can be okay if I knock it out of bounds. I can be okay if I snap hook it. That's okay. Like it's not what you're committed to, but because you can be okay with it, the acceptance word again, like I said about history, you're then free to play.
Mm.
And I think it was Jack Nicklaus who said that, he could be okay with all outcomes. And that's why he was so prolific, winning.
Yeah.
And it was authentic, right? So, yeah, when we look to the greats, they've had that similar mindset.
Right. Yeah. Even, and I know we mentioned Tiger earlier, and he would seem at first glance someone who, you know, despised mistakes and held himself to the highest standard where a mistake is completely unacceptable. But I always push back at that to say Tiger had incredible standards for himself, but he was able to accept the result because he knew there was always an opportunity for another one, right? There's no history, right? I'm just, my ball is here where it is, right? On 16 at Augusta and 2005 Masters, it doesn't matter how he got the ball to there. My ball is here. The hole is there. What do I have to do in this situation? It doesn't matter how I got here. So, as angry and emotional as he gets, would seem, he he has amazing acceptance, I think. And I don't know if most people would put the word acceptance on Tiger, but I think he does.
Yeah, I'd assert, watching him over the years, he's an incredible athlete. And, to be at that level, yes, of course, he swings it amazing, right, even now, but it's that mental side that allowed him to get it round in ways that other people couldn't. He seemed to thrive off it, which is like, again, that view and perspective. Like he was excited, right, by the challenge rather than fearful. So, same event, same tournament, right? So yeah, when an athlete really gets that their future is completely unknown and they're okay with that, that's a powerful being. Because, most people, as you said before, like life is uncertainty. I heard you say, right? And it is, but not many people are thinking that. And generally, if they are thinking it, they're like, no, I don't want it to be uncertain. Like, I want to control it. I want to control life, right? Because what that allows us to do is find safety, right? So this is why the mind will always traffic to the future to try and plan out like how to do something or worry about something, because it's trying to keep us safe. It's really sweet, right? So, any golf there, it's really quite cute. Thank you, brain. But it's a bit of a maladaptive response because I'm not under like a death threat right now, right? I'm playing golf, right? But
Right.
it's that level of importance that we place on things that it becomes life or death for us. But to really get the future is uncertainty, therefore it's limitless possibility, right? To
Yeah.
default to a negative is completely inaccurate. And
Mm.
I could say, oh, let's create a beautiful future. What if you get a hole in one, right? Is what someone might say, but it's still inaccurate because we don't know.
Right.
So the powerful athlete is the one that can be okay with all outcomes and just go, I've never stood here before. I've never played this hole before. I know what I can do, and let's see, let's fuck around and find out. So it's just like,
Nice. I
yeah,
like it.
so that's what, yeah, so that really allows for like play, joy,
Yeah.
like when we're kids playing golf, it's just, it's so much fun.
Mm,
And when you can get into that, like suddenly golf takes on just a whole new way of being. And ironically, because we're not trying to create a result to give us a feeling, because we can actually already access it now, right? Then the result that we're chasing for the feeling has lost all of its pressure.
mm,
What's the outcome? We play better and we get the outcome that we wanted much faster normally, right? Because we're no longer tense, it's no longer life or death. So for me, I've often been asked, like, oh, but I've used force and pressure all my life to get to where I've got to, especially in some of the other sports that are very physical, right? But I assert it's actually been their barrier to like the mountaintop that actually has no top to their potential. I'm like, imagine what you could have achieved if you were like moving from freedom or flow. And
mm.
they're like, oh, I haven't ever thought about it like that. I've been too busy hanging on to this like anger and hurt when my sports coach said that I couldn't do it. And I've used that as fuel to get to where I want to get to. Right. So that's where everything shifts. And
Yeah.
it's so powerful to see.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay. So that was beautiful. I appreciate you how you're eloquently saying these things. One thing you mentioned, I got two questions, but one thing you mentioned was about importance. So we've got you know, and all of this is cast into question, all of these adjectives, right? A lot of these adjectives are labels, perceptions, all these things. Uh, but we've got a quote unquote big tournament coming up, and it's important to me. I want to do well. I want to win. I want a good result. All of these things. So, should we be striving to erase importance? Should we, and I guess where someone might naturally go in their minds is, should we stop caring? What do you say to those kind of questions?
Yeah, it's so good. I'm loving this conversation, Josh. Like, honestly, the way you pick up on stuff is awesome, right?
Eh,
So much in that, which I'm excited to go into. So for me, it's the difference between like, no, I want you to care more, but I don't want you to worry,
mm,
right? It's subtle, but it's very, very powerful, right? So everything that you said, so the big tournament, the big is placing like a subjective view on it's a tournament, right? It's a tournament. And then you said, because I want to get the result I want, right? So the wanting sets up desire in language, right? Because in the present, generally we want what we don't have, or we don't want what we have, right?
yeah, no
Either
kidding.
way, we're caught in, yeah, we're in wanting, and which creates resistance because we don't have it, right? So instantly we're then even in more pressure. And then we go, or should I, is what you said, just not care, right? So, or should I let go of the importance? The should creates pressure again, right? It's a pressure word. It's like should, have to, must. Like when you hear people saying those words, you can see the world that they're living in, which is incredibly pressured. And then if they don't do it, they get to feel guilty and wrong. And generally, there'll be a bit of bad in there as well, right? So these are very childlike words that I'm using, but that's where we've picked them up and where we've learned our code as childhood, right? So yeah, in answer to your question, I'd reframe it. It's a tournament. There's nothing that you have to do or should do, right? And instead of like wanting the outcome, can you be okay with it being how it is?
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Acceptance.
Acceptance, yeah, it's a huge component of my work, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't make you passive, it doesn't make you weak, because what you're doing is you're developing this harmonious relationship with reality, right? You are fully present, you are there, you're not getting into past, you're not getting into future, you're just there,
Mm,
right? So when we can really get that nothing outside of us, whatever we achieve on the golf course is ever going to give us a feeling that we can't already have, and I assert is already there, right? We stop using these things as means of feeling something.
Right. Means to an end.
Yeah, it's like, oh, like when I go round in 69, then I'll be good enough. That's a value proposition. And it's also saying until I do that, well, I'm not good enough and I'm not allowed to be happy. That's
And
that's a pretty
spoiler alert, you still feel that way after you do it at some point, once the high wears off.
absolutely, because you're still, this is why I get back to like, you can think of this subconscious programming as creating like a lens that we look through, right? The blue glasses, the lens,
Mm.
right? So as long as you're looking through the lens of I'm not good enough, it doesn't matter what you do in the external world if you're still looking through the lens, because that's how it colors it. But if we get to the truth, like, is it an actual truth that you're not good enough? Is what I'd ask somebody. And they'd come back probably with a lot of evidence for me, right? Just like, yeah, when that happened and that happened and that. And I used to have all of the evidence, by the way. But if we were just to question, like, do we have like we're both wearing clothes, that was good for a podcast, right? But like a little label in the back is normally what's in clothes, right? But do we have like a manufacturing label inside of us that says, for me, Gary Waters, born in England, is not good enough? And it's like, no, I don't. And it's like, okay, where does that exist? Oh, it's in my mind. It's programming. Fundamentally, it's language, right? It's words. So when people start to get what they're being stopped by is words, I mean, it can be quite comical when they really get it because they're like, oh my gosh, right? That's why if anyone's listening, I said before, words create worlds. Our words create this lens that we then look through that then defines the experience that we have.
Mm.
So that's why I answered your question too, like, what do I do? Where do I start? Start observing the language that's running through your mind. And a beautiful practice to extend on it is just put a question mark where there's currently an exclamation mark, because that starts, oh, I'm bad. Changes to I'm bad. Hmm.
Mm.
Do you see? It's just so
Yeah.
language is why it's so language is code, it's programming.
Mm. That's interesting. Okay, so someone's playing and they're they're playing terrible and they say I'm playing terrible. So simply shifting that question to, well, am I playing terrible? And not stopping there, right? You've got a question, now you have to answer it. You don't just leave it as a question to I'll get to that later. You addressing it now, because the rest of this round is won't be played in the present if you are still hanging on to that past. Is that about right?
Yeah, yeah, beautifully said, right? So it's acknowledging it's not a truth, right? You're just playing, right? That is the truth of it. But that just because that's happened doesn't mean the rest of the round's going to go that way. It's
Right.
not just a nice thing to say, it's literally getting into that harmony with life to go like, I could ask that person, hey, do you know what you're going to do on the 17th whilst you're on the 13th? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, because it hasn't happened yet. I'm like, awesome. That's the truth, right? So you don't know. And the moment we get okay with I don't know, that is freedom, right? So it's to really question these narratives. And that's why I love the book that you shared with the listeners, right? Because what Eckhart Tolle really does, or Tolle, I never know how to say his
Yeah, I'm
last
not
name.
sure. Yeah.
No,
Toll, I
I know.
think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think if you're German, it's like Eckhart Tolle, right? But
Sure.
who knows?
Yeah.
I hung out,
Sure.
I lived there for a bit, but but yeah. So for Eckhart, what he really shows you is this deeper part of us,
Mm.
right? This deeper presence that can observe the thoughts on your mind, right? That can observe the feelings we experience on our body,
Mm.
right? That can then observe the external reality. So it observes the inner world and the outer world. And when we really, this is what I do in my coaching, is connect people with that being their true self, well, then the identity can change, their body can change, but the presence never changed. Getting deep for a golf podcast, but
Man, yeah, yeah.
uh,
And I was, and that's I love it because all the surface stuff doesn't really create lasting change. So there's been decades and decades and maybe centuries of surface level stuff, but this is this is like, okay, you've got all these symptoms that you're experiencing, all these emotions that you're experiencing, and they're all a result of something. And you can address those and band-aid those all you want. But until you address where they're coming from, you can't make any change. So one of those symptoms is emotions. And emotions, I guess you could label it with or define it in any kind of way, but you know, the things that come to mind is anger, frustration, annoyance, joy, happiness, um, exhilaration, whatever, being pissed off, right? These are emotions, and how I would define it. Are we are we striving to be unemotional and not, and this is where you could get into, let's attack the surface and just try to be unemotional, let's try to be even keeled. That's what a lot of people say, I just need to be more even keeled. But is the end result of what we're talking about going to lead to us being unemotional?
absolutely not. So
Okay.
like yeah, so like one of the ways that I love to look at this work is it's more like dissolution rather than solving, right? So like as I was explaining in and around like this label that, where does that exist? We're removing the I'm not enough in the presence of truth, right? So it is my assertion, my perspective that in the absence of all of our fears, our concerns, our negations of self, we could say I'm not something. If those were all gone, right? If I was to ask you, if in like the absence of all of your fears and your concerns, how would you feel?
Mm, free.
There we go, right? So it's actually what you get left with are these qualities of the deeper part of us, which is power, love, joy, freedom, a sense of peace, worth, right? Those are already there, right? And this is like why it's quite heartbreaking if you don't know about this work, because you're then seeing everybody thinking that they don't have any of those qualities and they're trying to garner them from external to add them to themselves, but you're
Mm,
still looking through I'm not something as the lens, right? So what my work is all about and what I've been blessed to learn off my mentors, especially Peter Crone, is this dissolution process, right? Is to show people they're not true. And in the absence of them, we get to feel joy. We get to feel peace. We get to feel freedom, right? Power, love, that they're already there. So that's why I can answer, because you gave me a great answer, free, with all of those gone, that's how you feel. So it's nothing about adding to us. That's why I said about the outcome, for somebody looking to win the tournament to then feel something because they're maybe feeling not enough. Oh, I've temporarily feel not enough. And then you said, yeah, but then it will go because it passes, right? So now we get to, well, if it's not true that I'm not enough, keeping the analogy or example rolling here, well, then there's just nothing to go chase.
mm,
And when I say there's nothing that you have to go chase, there's everything that you can go do because you love to, because you choose to, right? So that's a different game of being human. And, ever since I found that, because I didn't used to coach in this way, I've gone on my own evolution. I started off in, very much personal development, Tony Robbins style, like, hey, and it's great. I'm not putting it down. It's
yeah.
necessary, right? Because it gets you to a certain point. But then you reach a certain point where actually you start not trying to, let's say, perfect your personality or your identity. You actually recognize actually it's in the dissolution of it, this idea of ourself where true freedom and peace and power lie.
Mm, okay. Stripping away. all of the things that cause the what we would call negative emotions. The If something is causing fear, we need to address the thing that's causing the fear. If something is causing anger, annoyance, frustration, things that we would call the fancy word would be maladaptive. The lay term would be bad, right? Things that negative, things that we don't want to experience is just like you said, putting a question mark on it. I'm feeling fear. Okay, why? Where's that fear coming from? I'm feeling angry. Okay, why am I feeling angry? And is it really necessary? So addressing those as questions, not exclamation marks, they point you towards the source. And that's where you can address it.
Perfectly said.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, you got it. So,
Okay.
yeah, it stops you getting into the blame game of being a victim to life, right? Oh, it's because of my clubs, or it's because like that person like shouted on my backswing, or, you know, or we just blame ourselves, which is, even more detrimental. I'm just not good enough. So, yeah, to be what it does, it starts this internal questioning. And it allows us, as you beautifully said, to get back to the source of it, to the root cause, to start to be able to explore it, right? And to question it. And, spoiler alert, none of it's true. You're all awesome. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with you. Hate to break it to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like, that's how I see people. Like whenever I jump onto a Zoom, or if I'm speaking with someone in person, like I'm showing up about to hear a story as to why they feel they're limited, and I've got all of the love and compassion. I would assert those are my superpowers. Like I move from love, no judgment, right? But I get excited and passionate and apparently swear a lot. Um, Never in my normal life, by the way. It's just what wild I do.
I love it, man.
But yeah, it's to show people that it's just not true.
Mm.
It's just not. And when they see it, they just come alive. And for me, that's such a gift.
Yeah. So as we take all this and we're trying to strip away our past and or at least integrate our past, not pretend that it didn't happen, but integrate it, not perceive it in any kind of way. The events are what they are, and if they I'm going to butcher this, but if they weren't the way that they are, then that means they didn't happen. Because they happened, they are what they are. And I know that was nowhere near as good as you were saying it, but the um, now that we've dealt with past and kind of past identity, when we point towards the future, what does all of this do to goals or things that I want to achieve? You know, I've got let's make it personal. I've got two qualifiers for tournaments coming up, and I want to play well in them. And we talked about this a little bit with I've got a club championship. I want to do well, but with goals and things that I want to achieve, how do I how do I shift how I talk about goals and um, yeah, things that I want to achieve in the future?
A great question again, right? And it's like there's nothing wrong with goals. I personally have goals, right? And I'm super committed to them. The fact that I'm so creative in the absence of all of this past hurt, I've got a lot of vitality, but the challenge is like I then want to create loads, right? And it's just like, that in itself can become a bit overwhelming, right? So it's not a problem with goals. It's what energy are you moving from? Is it fear or is it freedom? Right. So it's to really just explore, okay, why am I chasing this goal? What's the why behind it? And there will be a reason for it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can get to like, we're never actually chasing the goal itself. Like you're not chasing to qualify. What we're also always chasing is the end product of the goal, right? Which is
Mm,
the feeling. Right. So
yeah.
whenever anyone achieves the goal, it's the feeling that you feel. That's what you're looking for. right? So this can be a bit of a wow for people. It's like, you're not chasing getting the car, switching gears totally,
Mhm.
right? Didn't mean that to use gears in the car there, but that
Yeah, there you
worked.
go.
Right? That was completely by accident, but I'll take it. Yeah. But it's just like, you're not chasing the car, you're chasing the feeling that it will give you. You're chasing the experience to a certain degree. So the moment you realize that whatever feeling you're looking to get as the end product to your goal, the question becomes, can you feel it right now in the absence of the goal? Right. And I assert 100%. Because if, I was to say, close your eyes and create, a mentalization of like an amazing time that you had, at some point in your life, you would experience that feeling in your body. So it's to really realize the feeling is already actually there. You can experience it any time, but I'm more interested in this, like the why. Why are you chasing it? Right. And can you be okay? Like, are you going to die if you don't qualify? Would be a good
Mm,
question.
all right, no.
No, right? So even there, that like elicits just a little sense of peace because we got to the root cause. Because all fears come down to the fear of death, like as extreme
Ultimately.
as that sounds, right? So if we go, oh, is it just a threat to my little ego, or is it a threat to like a death threat? It's like, oh, it's maybe a little threat to my ego, right? So the moment we can be okay with not qualifying, you're free to go qualify.
Yeah. Does that account for people who have actual success in, as we would call it? So the guy that does end up qualifying, does that mean that he felt this way and he had this kind of um, healthy self identity?
It depends, who knows? Like he seems what we could say is perhaps he has an absence of fear, which perhaps he just naturally has, right? But it's available to us all. So there's a lot of talented golfers out there, as you know, like you teach them, you coach them, right? And when we get into like especially the higher levels, there's not much in it, right? This is why they're all seeking out really great mental coaches because they're recognizing it's the small difference that makes a big difference because they can all swing it, they can all like smash it like miles. They've all got amazing short games, amazing at putting, right? Even amazing course management. But it's the execution, everything that leads up to that moment though, that is what's driving the car.
Mm,
So
yeah.
yeah, with regards to somebody else, like their mindset, just they might have had less hurt in their history, or maybe a bit like Tiger, they've learned to process it in a different way, and they can just leave that shot where it was, which is history,
Mm,
and they just move on. Some people just do it a bit naturally, right? It's like you can meet certain people and they're just naturally quite enlightened. You're just like, wow, like everything that you're doing took me like 12 years of intense work
right.
to get to where you're at. Like, so,
Yeah, not
it's,
fair.
yeah, it's just like, hey, but
Yeah.
I love the journey that I'm on. So, but yeah, I could bucket my lady into that little bracket, right? She's
Mm,
naturally very at peace, just a bundle of joy. And, for me, it just felt like I had to work on that to
mm,
get to that space. So,
sure.
the house and the wise, it could be anything, but if there is some kind of fear moving into that qualification or some pressure, that's a great opportunity to get to practice.
Mm, yeah. Okay. So speaking of your journey and goals, with all of this in mind, what is your future in golf? And what do you want to accomplish in golf? And are you proceeding from fear? Are you being driven from fear and that kind of striving, or from freedom?
So I'd say I'm human. So
Mhm.
like, do I function from freedom and peace and all of the time? No, but to a big degree, Yeah, once you learn this, and because I'm like spending hours daily with beautiful people going over and over again, it gets pretty integrated, right? So, there's still that time where, I've got a mentor. I've mentioned him a couple of times, Peter, and it's just like, if there's something that I can't quite unpack because it's a blind spot, I'll go see him and speak with him. I'll be like, hey, what do you see? Right? Because it's so difficult, even if we know like as much as like you and I know, like it can be tough to see it in ourselves because we're so close to it. Right. So as it relates to, my intentions for the future, I'm really just focusing on right now.
Mm,
Right. It's just like I'm here with Josh. I'm loving my life. I hope that I get to have more of this experience called life because it's awesome. Right? It's so much fun. I spent probably the first, I don't know, 30 years of it fighting life, which sucked, right? But was
mm,
necessary for the evolution of me.
mm,
But yeah, I'm super committed to, especially in the golfing world, to really just work with more people to be able to share some of these insights. It becomes really powerful when it's individualized.
mm,
When I'm working with someone on their direct history and we can go into specifics, right? And for me, I just love seeing what becomes available in the absence of their fears and worries, and we
mm,
can say the absence of their old personality.
mm.
It's just like magic, and it brings me so much joy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so we mentioned the power of now as I think something everyone should go read. I guess I can't wholeheartedly recommend it because I'm only 30 some pages in, but I can make a pretty strong assumption. It's a must read for listeners of this and listeners of you. What's something else that you've read? What's another resource? I guess let's keep it to books. Is there another book that you've read that comes to mind that um, everyone should read this that is interested in this vein of things?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I've read a lot of books, but I'm more auditory, so I listen to them all. But
Sure.
I generally buy them both. I seem to have got into this habit of like deciding to spend more money and just going,
Twice the money.
I want the book, I want it to listen to, and for me, I'm quite a slow burn. I read it over and over and over, and then another couple overs again, and then I get it. Right.
Mm,
So, yeah, I'd say some great books. I mean, this one's a little bit heavy. I mean, I normally you kind of took my book. I would have said Power of Now is a great place to start. But I'd say Power versus Force by David R. Hawkins. That had a huge impact on my world. It's
mm,
pretty sticky at the start because it's quite sciencey,
mm,
right? But it's really profound. It's very deep.
mm,
Normally I wouldn't really give that one, but for some reason that's the one that's coming through me to
sure.
share here. But yeah, when it relates to even working with, most people are looking for like a sports book, but for me, because we're looking at this persona, this identity, actually this is more like personal development, or I make the joke of personal undevelopment.
Mm, yeah, right. Stripping away things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Dissolution,
it's
like you said.
dissolution. Yeah, that's why the kind of branding for me is live limitless, right? And people think, oh, limitless like goals, results.
Yeah.
But for me, what I'm talking about is living limitless, as in living without constraints,
Mm,
living without those I'm not some things,
yeah.
right? Because living that way free is, I assert, what we're kind of all looking for,
Yep.
right? So,
Yeah.
so yeah, Power versus Force, that
Okay.
would be a tricky read, but
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
why not
I mean,
go?
this is a one of the deepest episodes of this podcast. So if someone has stuck all the way to the end of this, then they probably want a deep book. So I think that's a good suggestion.
I like that. I like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So where would you send people? I know I've got your website, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've got garywaters.co.uk. That's your site. And on Instagram, I am Gary Waters. So is there anywhere else that you'd send people, anything that you would, I guess, want to sell or just yeah, what would you, this is the floor is yours for this one.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. And yeah, those are the best two places. The website is where you can generally contact me most easiest. Instagram, I just use as a give back, to be honest. I learned, as I said, so much for free. I just love to share little insights for people that, can't get in a coaching container with me. I generally don't sell. People find me is kind of how I operate, via frequency. It's amazing how that works. But
Sure.
so yeah, that would be the place if you want to learn more. That would be where to find me.
Okay, beautiful. Well, Gary, this has been awesome. This has been thoughtful, and I've learned a lot in this hour plus. So I really, really appreciate your depth and your authenticity. This was great.
Thank you so much, Josh. And I want to thank you because you've got an awesome podcast. Like the work that you're doing is incredible. I found you just through skipping through podcasts, but it was one of like the top rated. So just congrats to you. Keep doing what you're doing. You're such a bright light. Like for me to have this conversation, which is incredibly deep, for you to track it and then to process it in the moment, I'm just incredibly impressed. So
Huh.
amazing. Just great to
Yeah.
speak with you.
Well, thank you so much, Gary. This has been awesome. So we'll see you down the road.
Awesome. Speak soon.
All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Gary. Was I right? Was it deep or what? Yeah, that was an awesome, juicy, rich conversation with Gary. And like I said at the beginning, I love this stuff. I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours, but Gary had a time limit that I had to honor. So if you made it all the way through this episode, thank you for listening. This is my passion. This kind of stuff is what I love talking about, and I hope that you love it too. And I hope that you glean some good information that's going to help you to ask yourself those questions, to not just assume the past was bad or negative, or take use that past hurt to inform future fear. Don't just take those things as givens. Question things. Question how you feel. Question your motivations. Question your fears. If you take nothing away from this podcast but that, start to question your own emotions and experiences and things like that. So really, really good stuff. And something I always mention at the end of these episodes, what you've heard here isn't therapy. It's meant for entertainment and information purposes only. If you need some help on some deeper things that you're going through, I would encourage you to go talk to a licensed professional. But if you have questions for me, or you're interested in working with me one-on-one on your golf psychology, you can contact me. Send me an email to josh@joshnicholsgolf.com. You could also go to my website, joshnicholsgolf.com, or you could find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. Both of those, I am Josh Luke Nichols. And yeah, those are the kind of the best places to find me. That's where I'm kind of most public, putting out most of my stuff. You can also listen, or I guess watch this episode on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, hello YouTube. But if you're listening to the podcast, if you're interested in seeing Gary and you learn better by seeing, you could go check it out on YouTube. I think if you just search Josh Luke Nichols or Josh Nichols Golf on YouTube, you'll find it. Or The Mental Golf Show. Search that on YouTube. You should be able to find it there. So thank you so much for listening to The Mental Golf Show. If you liked this episode, I would love it if you subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, you could hit that like button. All of these are the best free ways to support the podcast. You can also leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave a review of up to 5 stars if you feel that we have earned it. Okay. Thanks again for listening to The Mental Golf Show. I'm Josh Nichols. Catch you next time.